So imagine you're a worker at a Russian military academy, just going about your day in September 2017, when you find a cell phone lying on the ground. You pick it up, thinking maybe you can return it to whoever lost it. You unlock it, and what you see makes your blood run cold. Photos of human meat, dismembered body parts, a man posing with a severed human head, images so disturbing that you immediately call the police. That phone, it belonged to a man named Dmitry Baksheev. And what investigators found next would reveal one of the most horrifying cases in modern Russian criminal history. This all went down in Krasnodar, a city in southern Russia near the Black Sea. The phone was found near a military aviation academy, and when police looked through it, they knew they had something seriously wrong on their hands. The images weren't just disturbing, they were evidence of crimes that seemed almost medieval in their brutality. Within days, investigators tracked down the phone's owner, Dmitry Bakshev, a 35-year-old man who worked as a general laborer at the military academy. He lived there with his wife, Natalia, who was 42 at the time. They had a small apartment on the academy grounds, and honestly, by all accounts, they seemed like pretty unremarkable people. Nobody suspected what was happening behind closed doors. When police raided their apartment, what they found was like something out of a horror film. I'm talking preserved human remains in jars, containers with what appeared to be pickled body parts, photographs scattered everywhere showing the couple with human remains. There were images of Natalia posing with severed heads, photos of Dmitry holding body parts like they were trophies. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Investigators found evidence that suggested the couple wasn't just killing people, they were eating them. There were recipes, cooking instructions, and what appeared to be human flesh that had been prepared for consumption. Some reports mentioned finding a bag of frozen body parts and even a jar containing a preserved human hand. The apartment also contained videos, disturbing footage that investigators had to review as evidence. I won't go into graphic detail here, but these weren't accidental recordings. This was documented, deliberate, and showed a couple that seemed to take pride in what they were doing. Now here's where the case gets complicated. After their arrest, both Dmitry and Natalia started talking, and what they said was absolutely wild. Dmitry initially claimed they had killed and cannibalized up to 30 people over the span of 18 years. 30 people. He described how they would target vulnerable individuals, often people who were homeless, transient, or unlikely to be immediately missed. According to their confessions, they had a system. They would lure victims to their apartment, kill them, dismember the bodies, and then consume parts of the remains. Dmitry talked about it almost casually, like he was describing a hobby. He mentioned preserving certain body parts, cooking others, and even sharing their meals between them. Natalia's statements were equally chilling. She described preparing human flesh like it was any other meat. There were reports that she had notebooks with recipes and preparation methods. Some investigators said she talked about the taste, the texture, about which parts were better than others. It's the kind of detail that makes you realize these weren't impulsive crimes. This was systematic, planned, and carried out over what they claimed was nearly 2 decades. But here's the thing about confessions in cases like this. You need evidence. And while the physical evidence in the apartment was horrifying, it didn't support 30 victims. Not even close. When people in town asked Natalia, "You and your husband don't work anywhere permanently, so how do you make a living?" she'd explain, "I bake pies." When they asked her, "With what?" she'd dismiss it with, "Whatever I can find." Now, residents of the houses adjacent to the aviation town recall this conversation with a shudder. As the investigation revealed, the Bakshev's victim was Krasnodar resident Elena Baksheeva, born March 5, 1982, a native of Omutninsk. Elena is known to have worked as a waitress in the city and later as a landscaping worker at a military base. Dmitry Baksheev also worked there as a janitor for a time. On the night of September 7th to 8th, 2017, and began drinking with her in a secluded area. At one point, the intoxicated woman began sexually assaulting Dmitry Baksheev right in front of his wife, which displeased her. Natalia, jealous of her husband, commanded, "Dima, kill her." Dmitry, greatly influenced by his wife, immediately stabbed his new acquaintance in the chest. The Bakshevs then dismembered the body, keeping some of the remains at home and dumping others in the grounds. Investigators went through missing persons reports going back years. They searched the academy grounds. They brought in cadaver dogs. They interviewed anyone who might have seen something suspicious. And while they found evidence of cannibalism, while they found human remains, they couldn't tie the couple to anywhere near the number of murders they claimed. The forensic analysis showed that the remains found in the apartment belonged to at least one confirmed victim, possibly a few more, but definitely not 30. This created a really strange situation where you had a couple confessing to being prolific serial killers, but the evidence only supporting a fraction of what they claimed. So who were Dmitry and Natalia Baksheev? Dmitry was described as a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly. He'd worked at the military academy doing maintenance and odd jobs for years. Natalia was a bit more outgoing, but still, nothing that would raise red flags. They'd been together for a long time, and people who knew them described them as just ordinary. There were some reports that Natalia had worked in the academy's cafeteria at some point, which, given what they were accused of, is particularly disturbing. Imagine sitting next to these people at work, having normal conversations while they were going home and doing what they allegedly did. Some psychological evaluations suggested both had underlying mental health issues, but honestly, trying to understand the psychology behind something like this is incredibly difficult. Were they folie à deux, where one partner influenced the other into increasingly extreme behavior? Did they both have these impulses independently? These are questions that might never have satisfying answers. The legal process moved forward, but it was complicated. In 2020, before the trial could fully conclude, Dmitry Baksheev died in pre-trial detention. He apparently fell from a height in the detention facility, and while there were questions about whether it was suicide or an accident, his death meant he'd never face final judgment in court. Natalia, however, did go to trial. And here's where things get even stranger. Despite the horrific confessions, despite the evidence found in the apartment, she was ultimately convicted of just one murder. One. The victim was identified as a 35-year-old woman, and along with the murder charge, Natalia was convicted of desecrating a body. She received about 10 years in prison. 10 years. For what prosecutors could prove was one murder and the cannibalistic desecration of remains. Many people felt this was incredibly light, given what investigators found, but without bodies, without more concrete evidence, the prosecution couldn't make the larger case stick. This case leaves us with so many questions. Were Dmitry and Natalia really responsible for 30 deaths? Or were they exaggerating, perhaps trying to achieve some kind of infamy? Some criminologists think they inflated their numbers, that they wanted to be seen as more prolific than they actually were. What about all those missing people in the Krasnodar area? Did the Bakshevs have anything to do with their disappearances, or were these separate cases? Without Dmitry alive to provide more information, and with Natalia giving inconsistent statements, we may never know the full truth. There's also the question of how they got away with it for so long. If they really had been killing people since 1999, how did nobody notice? The military academy was their home and workplace. People came and went. How did the smell, the evidence, the suspicious activity never raise alarms? The Baksheev case shocked Russia and made international headlines. It brought up uncomfortable questions about how society treats its most vulnerable members. If the couple's claims were true, many of their victims were people living on the margins, people who wouldn't immediately be missed. That's a sobering reminder of how some lives are valued less than others. The case also highlighted issues with the Russian criminal justice system, the challenges of prosecuting cases that rely heavily on confessions, and the difficulty of finding remains and evidence when so much time has passed. So that's the Dmitry and Natalia Baksheev case. A couple who lived seemingly normal lives while allegedly committing acts of unimaginable horror. A case where the confessions were more shocking than what could ultimately be proven in court. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who blend in, who seem ordinary, who you'd never suspect. Whether they killed 30 people or one, whether they were serial killers or a deeply disturbed couple who committed isolated acts of violence, the evidence of cannibalism was real. The suffering of at least one confirmed victim was real. And somewhere in Krasnodar, there might be families still wondering what happened to their missing loved ones, never knowing if the Bakshevs were responsible. It's one of those cases that stays with you, not just because of the gruesome details, but because of everything it represents about human nature, about evil hiding in plain sight, and about how sometimes the truth is even stranger and more disturbing than we want to believe.